Don Yaeger, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. As I just mentioned, my wife went through your storytelling masterclass and thought it was phenomenal. And she said, "Do you know Don Yaeger?" I said, "No." She's like, "You have to listen to him. He's phenomenal. And I've been following you ever since. And you have not disappointed." And so it's an honor to get to spend time with you. So welcome.
Ditto. Thanks so much, Doug. I love your work and have appreciated getting a chance to go back and listen to some of your work, your podcast as well.
Oh, thank you. I want to start with just talking to you about interviewing and mentoring. You had a long career at Sports Illustrated. You've written, I think, nearly 30 books if you're not already at 30.
35.
And 35. Woo!
I know. I'm old is what I am.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, throughout your career, you've got to spend time with some of the most legendary people on the planet, specifically in athletics. And I'm just curious on the front end, I tell leaders all the time, hey, ask someone to mentor you, ask someone out to coffee. You'd be surprised who would meet with you. And I'm just curious, can you talk to us about how you've opened doors to get meetings with some of these people and any advice you'd have for leaders along that line?
So a couple of things, a really instructive moment for me occurred a number of years ago. I was at Sports Illustrated as a writer. I was working on a story. It was about Shaquille O'Neal, he was at the time the hip hop star of the LA Lakers. And I had heard that he was going out on a regular basis to be mentored by John Wooden and the great basketball coach. And so I asked for permission to join them for a session. And it was spectacular. It was they spent all this great time, but they never talked about basketball. They talked about how to be a better husband, a better father, better teammate, better leader. And as we were getting up, I looked at Coach Wooden, who I'd met a few times, but I didn't really know. And I said, "Coach, you're one of the most extraordinary people on the planet. How does someone get mentored by someone like you?" And he looked at me and he said, "You ask." And
Wow.
I thought, wow. And I said, "Well, how many people ask?" And he said, "Not as many as you might think. Most people immediately assume there's no way that person would ever take time to talk to me. And so they don't ask, and they take themselves out of the equation before the conversation begins." So I go away. About a month later, I'd written this little piece, and I reached out to Coach to ask him what he thought. And he was very polite. And I said, "Coach Wooden, something tells me that while I was standing there, I was supposed to ask." And he looked at me on the phone and he said, "Don, what took you so long?" and from that point on, for the next 12 years, every other month, I would fly to California for a day with John Wooden. And it was among the most important and game-changing, life-changing moments that I could ever imagine. And we ended up writing a book together that came out on his 99th birthday, the last book that he ever had a chance to author. And it was he was just a game changer for me. But the whole thing came down to those two words: you ask. Wow. And so, we could come up with all the great grandiose plans, how to do it, whatever, but the greatest hurdle for most of us is you ask. And so that would be the thing I'd offer, Doug.
Yeah, and so the ask is great, and then hopefully you get a few yeses along the way, but there's also actually preparing and conducting the meeting. I'm really curious on your process here. You also are doing a podcast now. How do you prepare, and how much preparation goes into your meetings with these great leaders that you get to meet with?
Well, with Coach Wooden, his rules for me were very clear, which were we would block this day to spend time together. But when I ran out of questions, the day would end. And so obviously I was, my job then was to come up with enough questions to fill a full day, because I didn't want to give up the opportunity to learn from John Wooden. And so, what I learned there was the art of the preparation. Yes, I was going to get this chance, but think about coming up with enough questions to ask a legend what you could and learn for an entire day. But you mentioned the podcast. We have a podcast somewhat like yours. We call it The Corporate Competitor. And I do interviews where I interview executives who have played sports about how being an athlete made them a better leader. And this is an interview I did just yesterday with this senior vice president of the Ashley furniture, right?
Hmm.
Who played basketball at Vanderbilt. But I mean, I have 7 pages of notes of my prep, and then I wrote 7 pages of notes during the presentation, during the interview, because I wanted to know so much about him in advance, much like you did. I mean, the work that you sent me to show your prep, it changes the dynamic of the person, the way the person responds to you. We say all the time, there's nothing that makes people more interested in you than when they find out you've taken time to show interest in them.
Wow.
And so that prep work is it's the key to everything.
Yeah, so you prep for a meeting, then you're actually in it, and so I am curious because this is, as a podcaster, I'm 365 episodes in. I've really had to grow in this. How much do you stick to the script of the questions that you want to address versus just letting the conversation organically go where it could go out of curiosity?
Well, a great question, and what I like about it is that's not on your list of questions you had for me, so that's good. But that's the art of interviewing right there, is asking good and probing questions, then listening, which is a lost art today, listening for where the answer goes to see what's the natural follow. And is there a natural follow? And maybe there's not. But if there is, there's nothing worse than listening to an interview and hearing a great answer and realizing the host is just following a list and they're not, or the interviewer is not listening to the answer as I'm listening to it, because they don't have that natural curiosity for that next question. So I think it's uber important to be ready with a list, but also to be ready to flex.
Yeah. So after the meeting, I am curious on the follow-up end, and I specifically want you to use a story that I heard you share about Walter Payton. But what do you do on the follow-up end? Because I think a lot of times, you said you met with John, twice or every other month for 10 to 12 years. Yeah. So clearly he valued the time that you brought as well. Do you do anything on the follow-up end to make sure that the leader knows that you valued them on the follow-up side?
Well, yeah. So this again came from Coach Wooden. His instructions were the first thing I had to do when I came back the next time was tell him what I did with what I learned the last time. Wow. And so what that told him was that it was not wasted time, and he wasn't wasting time this next time with me. So I think that's a extraordinarily important part of any good relationship, especially in a mentoring setup, is that if someone has asked you for your time and you've given it, the first thing you should expect back the next time you talk to them is, here's what I did with what I learned.
So on that end, I know we're both, I think you're a John Maxwell team speaker, right?
I am one of his thought leaders, yes.
Thought leader. So that's great. So one of my favorite lines from John is just be unforgettable. Mm-hmm. And I think on the follow-up end, that should be part of your goal, is to be unforgettable. And one way, I think, is what you just said, of actually doing something with what you learned. But the other way is just thinking of ways to add value. And can you share, when you interviewed Walter Payton, how you followed up with his daughter's wedding? Can you tell that story? Because I just thought, I was just blown away. And I thought, talk about becoming unforgettable. Yeah.
Yeah. I had the opportunity, as you're referencing, to live with Walter Payton, who was my hero, right? For the last 10 weeks of his life while writing his autobiography. And over the course of that time, there were lots of great interviews. There was lots of windows of time where Walter, because he was dying, didn't have time for me or wasn't in condition to be interviewed. But when we got really powerful time, it was awesome to get into conversation. And so one day I asked him, I said, Walter, you're first ballot Hall of Famer. You're the NFL record holder for yards gained as a running back. You're you're Super Bowl champion. You name it all. You've got everything there is in your profession. If you could trade all of those records, all of those, for one day in the future, what would the day be? And Walter didn't even hesitate. He said, I would give it all to walk my daughter down the aisle on the day she gets married.
Hmm.
And then he proceeded to tell me what he would say to his daughter on the day that she got married, like his advice to her. Sorry, I'm emotional because this was like I'm thinking about it right now.
Hmm.
But it was this powerful conversation. Now, his daughter Brittany was 13 when we had that conversation, and I was going to write the book that year. So there's no way I should put that in the book. That would be completely inappropriate. That she read that her father said that his day that he wanted in the future was to walk her down the aisle. But as it happened, so I didn't write it in the book. But as it happened years later, Brittany got married, and I got the invitation to be there at the wedding. And I reached out to her, and we talked for a bit. And I said, "Hey, I'd like to come and sit down with you. I've got something to share with you." And I was able to go meet with her and share with her what her father would say to her on the day of her wedding, which was just, powerful. And she held on to that for a long time. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was a TV special that she hosted in Chicago about her father, and she told the story. I've never really told the story until she told it. But when she did, I felt like I was comfortable. I was in a place that I could share it with other people. But anyway, pretty amazing.
Yeah, you want to talk about being unforgettable? Wow.
Yeah.
That question you asked Walter. I mean, what a question! And you ask questions for a living. I'm just curious. Do you have an art of collecting questions, or do you have just a list of, hey, here are just best questions ever? Or do you just literally make up new questions every time you meet with people?
It's usually around the research, whatever I look at, think about, and whatever I would want to know from that person. So, one thing that I always look for are ways to ask the hard question. Some journalists just ask it, right? There's no setup, there's no preparation, there's no work to get the listener, the person you're interviewing, in the right frame. And I think it's super important that the person be in the right frame for them to hear the question properly and for you to ask it properly. And yeah, that wouldn't have been the right question with Walter at many other times of his life, right? Or it might not have been the right time that day if I hadn't set it up with all that he had achieved, right? And then said, but now you've got all those things. What would you trade those things for? And those are the kinds of questions where we dig deep, right? As interviewers, or and people have to be ready and in the right frame to dig deep with you.
Wow. I did want to ask you about journalism just in general. I know you've been out of it for a while, but I'll just leave this open-ended. Is there anything about journalism or journalists that you wish people knew? Especially in today's culture, I think there's a lot of assumptions about the media and what it's like to be a journalist. I'm just curious what your insights and thoughts would be.
Well, to your point, I'm not in daily journalism anymore. I still write books, and so that is a form of the profession. But when I thought about that question, one of the things that really jumps out to me is that too many people, because of the way journalists have been categorized by political figures or others, fake news and all these other phrases that are used. There's this phraseology used around the journalism elite, right? The elite, and the truth is that that's such a tiny percentage of anybody in that profession. It is largely filled with people like you and me, right?
Wow.
It's filled by people who are working every day to make a good living and to try to be and to try to do. Then they're usually the most inquisitive people you'll ever meet. And so I think the thing I would probably share with people is that sadly, if we categorize them all in some phrase, we lose touch, as we would with any other profession, with who's really doing most of the work.
Wow. Thank you for that insight. Going back to questions quickly, I don't know if you know who Erwin McManus is. He's a pastor in California. I really love the way he thinks. But I remember him telling a story where he interviewed Larry King. And he said, Larry, you're the greatest interviewer on the planet, arguably. What questions should we be asking you? And interestingly, Larry King said, you should be asking me how I'm dealing with my mortality, which I thought was extremely profound. And I'm just curious, in this season of your life where you are specifically, I have a lot of things I want to go through, but is there any questions that we should be asking you based on where you're at in your journey?
For me, I think the greatest thing that I'm a late in life dad. I didn't become a dad until I was 45. And so for me, I think, it's probably a simple question for most people, but how fatherhood's changed me is the thing that I'm probably most fascinated by. I've talked to many people for many years as a journalist who'd gone through fatherhood, asked that question. So the opportunity to finally, a number of years ago, now they're teenagers, right? They're 13 and 14. But it's amazing what it does to you. And for those, I realized that I missed that opportunity for so many years, but I'm so grateful that I have it today.
Yeah. And how would you say it's changed you?
It has totally changed. And this again might sound like a trite answer, but it's changed what matters to me. How many things, possessions used to matter, but today I couldn't care less. And that is, I think, where the greatest change, at least for me, was understanding that so many things that I had once treasured now mean not a whit.
That's so good. Yeah, I'm a father of four. Four, 2 girls, 2 boys, 6 and under. So it's a wild season, but I would absolutely agree with that. Not much more is important than those guys right there. I want to go back to storytelling. So you've already shared a few stories here where you're in tears. It was funny in researching you. I don't think I've heard anyone describe you outside of you're one of the best storytellers on the planet, if not the best. I mean, over and over again, it seems like that's consistent feedback. We already mentioned my wife went through your storytelling masterclass. Why do stories matter, and how can leaders get better at storytelling?
Stories matter because they are core to everything we are. There is your origin story. Who are you? What drives you? What makes you? There's your professional story. Why do you do what you do? What within that brings you to work every day and makes you and creates energy for you? There are so many stories for us that are central to everything we are. We want to communicate and what we hope to be, and it always fascinates me when I talk to people who say, "Well, I don't have a story. There's no story. I'm just a whatever, and so I have no story." And so, what I love about storytelling is when you start teaching it to other people, when you start sharing with other people that they not only possess stories, but that when told well, they will become more attractive to other people. And I don't mean that in a physical sense. I mean, people want to do things with people that they are attracted and interested in. And storytelling makes you that. And so I think it's the greatest art form in your ability to actually draw others to you. And all of us want to be part of a tribe, and we'd like to be able to have but to be part of a tribe, you have to have others surround you, and the best way to get there is through storytelling.
Wow. And can you talk about authenticity in storytelling? I was actually hearing you share, and I don't know when you stepped into public speaking in addition to writing books. It may have been at the same time. But can you share the feedback that you received? I believe you said when you jumped into that, you got a speaking coach. and the initial speaking coach, and they gave you feedback that wasn't so helpful. Can you share that story? Because I thought it was just so helpful for leaders. Because I think, anyway, share that story and then I'll share.
Well, it was a speaking coach who looked at me physically, right? I'm larger. I played football, and their sense of me and what I should project, right, was booming and loud, and almost, I mean, trying to like draw people in with your and that's not who I am. But I tried it, and I failed because it was inauthentic, and it was a second coach who ultimately realized I'm reasonably soft spoken. I'm emotional. Like I'm not afraid to have a tear or two if I'm engaged in something that draws that from me. And so I had to learn to be okay with those things and be better at actually not running from them. And I think what people feel when they see that or hear that from me is that I care, and which makes them care.
That's so good. Yeah, I think in the leadership space, everyone thinks I have to be Stephen Furtick or I have to be John Maxwell or I have to be Andy Stanley, and they try to model that instead of just being authentically themselves. And what I love about that is just the fruit of you actually being authentically you. When John Maxwell, Simon Sinek, and all these people are saying, Don's the greatest storyteller on the planet, it's just you being authentically you. And so I just love the outcome of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, no, thank you. It's I marvel when folks like them say that. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and where did you play football? Just out of curiosity, what position?
I was a linebacker, and but years ago in the Mid American Conference, Ball State.
Okay, awesome. That's a lot of fun. You've written 35 books. I'd be remiss not to ask you. We have a lot of aspiring authors on the podcast. What advice do you have for people who want to write books?
I would tell them that. And this may sound, again, I hope it doesn't sound trite, but it's so important. You need to be really passionate about whatever it is you're going to write about, because at the end of the day, there's writing a book it's a grind. I mean, it is. There's going to be a place. I mean, you think about it. You're crafting 60,000 words on a subject. And there's going to be a number of places in that process where you're going to go, oh man, I just can't do it today, or whatever. If you aren't really passionate about what you're writing and about what you're writing about, very poor sentence structure there. If you're not passionate, those days will win. And if I want to win over the day, I need to bring my passion to what I do every day. And so I have not in many, many years written anything that just doesn't fire me up. And I don't write with people that don't fire me up. I don't tell stories with people that don't engage me. And so I love that I get that opportunity today to pick and choose. But again, part of that is been around a while. But I would advise anybody looking to do a project to make sure they are just, man, I cannot wait to wake up every day to tell this story.
And it's one thing to publish a book, but then, I think so many times people think that's where the journey ends. Sales would just automatically come. But there's also a whole other side of actually getting books into hands. I think I heard a stat, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's something like 95% of books never sell over 5,000 copies. Have you learned anything on the other side as far as, promoting the book, selling, et cetera, that you would think would be helpful?
Yeah, without question. So I've been blessed. In total, my books have sold over 7 million copies. So it's
Come on.
I know it's crazy. But I would say the answer to that is to find something every day when you can look for an opportunity to talk about your work. And in today's day and age, between social media, between opportunities, blogs, but between podcasts, all the different ways that the world grows to learn something. There, without question, there's an opportunity every day for you to talk about your work. And most people, as you said, they think the work is done when the manuscript is submitted. I mean, the truth is that's just when it begins. The opportunity to get out in front of it, get out, make sure other people understand why it was important to you and why it was important enough to you that it now should be important to them. Those are that's a grind, just like writing the book is.
Yeah, well, congratulations on 7 million. That's a lot of people that you're impacting, and so yeah, kudos to you for all of that.
Thank you.
It's a leadership podcast. We have to talk a little bit about leadership, and I heard you share a story about just great teams that I thought would add so much value to our audience. And you can share another story if you have another example. But I heard you talk about the Team USA basketball team, arguably the best team ever, and how that evolved over time. And Coach K, can you, if you'd be willing to, share that story and what you learned about great teams from that experience?
Super. Yeah, no, I did. I spent 5 years kind of studying the high performing teams and what are all around the world, business and sports. But the one thing that came up most frequently was this idea that the best teams had a connected sense of passion, right? That they knew they were in service of something. And we've heard this phrase before, bigger than themselves, but most people can't quantify what that means. But Mike Krzyzewski, the head coach of USA Basketball, could, right? He understood it. And what he understood was that many players who were on his roster when he took over the team were on the USA team in part because Nike was paying them to wear their shoes in international competitions. And he wanted the players to recognize that to be able to wear those letters on your chest made you teammates with other people who also wore those letters on their chest, but for a far different reason. So he started bringing in to talk to the players, members of the Wounded Warrior Project. He would take the team to be in the presence of soldiers, again, young men and women wearing the letters USA on their chest, but not getting celebrated quite like the players were. And he wanted them to feel like they were partners, that they were actually teammates. And he called these feel it moments when you felt like you were actually responsible to someone else for what you do. And this is kind of the driver in how great teams come together, is that you feel this sense together. And the ultimate story in that process for Coach was that he took the team before the London Olympics. He took them to Arlington National Cemetery. And while they're there, three of our best, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, got the chance to present the wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. Wow. And shortly after that, General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, asked the players to walk with him through Arlington so he could tell them stories. And after a bit, he asked the players to come with him to Section 60, which are the freshest graves at Arlington. And while there, players are all standing there. No one knows what to say. It's emotional. Coach Krzyzewski notices that about 100 feet away, there's a young man standing amongst a group of graves. He's in civilian clothes, but he's got a crew cut. Coach assumes he's a member of the military, and he notices the young man has a backpack over his shoulders, and he's moving from grave to grave, reaching in the backpack, pulling out pictures and laying them down. And so Coach walks over and he said, "Excuse me, sir. My name is Mike Krzyzewski. I am the head men's basketball coach for the U.S. Olympic team, and I'm wondering if you would share what you're doing here today." And the young man looked at him and said, "Coach, I know who you are." He said, "This was my team," as he pointed to the graves at his feet. And he said, we had a mission and it didn't go as planned. But these are pictures of me and them in better days. Mm-hmm. And Coach said, "Sir, would you come talk to my players?" And he did. He walked over and he stood in the center of that amazing collection of talent. He started talking about what it meant to care for each other, what it meant to truly be a team. he talked about, sacrifice, what it looked like. And then he started talking about survivor's guilt. He wasn't there the day the incident happened, but he wished he had been. And at that stage, he started crying and he turned around and he walked away. And Coach Krzyzewski leaned in to the players. He said, gentlemen, this is why we came here today, because I want you to feel what it means to represent the United States of America. And that team went to London and just destroyed the Olympics, right? I mean, they were the outside of the dream team. They were maybe the greatest team ever to put on a show at an Olympic tournament, but it was because they felt who they were truly serving, right? And it wasn't Nike, and it wasn't basketball, and it was this sense that they were part of something truly bigger than themselves. And you would think that just naturally, you put the letters USA on your chest, you feel that, but it's not true, right? It's not true for many of us with our work or whatever we do. We have to be reminded that what we do matters, and we have to be reminded who it matters to. And when you can do that with your team, the discretionary energy that comes from your team together just does something that's special.
Yeah, I don't think it gets any more powerful than that. And leaders, I just hope that you just will let that sink in, let that story sink in, and I hope that you'll start to implement something like that with your team. Show them why I work at a homeless rescue mission here in Pittsburgh, and so we try to do that all the time, of just celebrating men and women who have transformed their lives, coming from some of the darkest places in their lives, and to see them turn around. That's why we show. We have a graduation coming up in 2 weeks, and we'll spend the whole night just celebrating. This is why we show up to work every day, because these men and women are worth it. And so thank you for sharing that, Don.
No, I tell you, that is, to me, it's the number one habit that I found among great teams. It's the opening chapter of the book that I wrote on the subject. And it's a story I love to tell because it reminds me how I have to remember daily what I do matters to other people, and that makes me work a little harder at it.
So good. You talked about team habits. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you have one question that you've always asked in every interview. And I think it's, if you could share one habit that has set you apart from your competitors throughout your career, what would it be? And one, I would love you to answer that question, is what has set you apart when you were at Sports Illustrated, now that you're a speaker, author? What's one habit that's really impacted you?
I would say my habit is over preparation. And it's funny because I don't actually think that's a word. I don't think you can over prepare. But I think that if you commit yourself to always being ready for the moment, right? Even if the moment doesn't ultimately come to be, that willingness to never be outworked because I'm over prepared generally has served me well.
And I think, correct me if I think you've interviewed over 3,000 people, probably more than that. Are there one or two other answers that really either changed your life forever or that are really memorable?
Well, yeah. So Michael Jordan, when he answered the question for me, he was talking to me about the idea that there's, for him, when he fails, right? When something doesn't go his way, he has always been committed to, he does not make excuses when something doesn't go his way. And the way and the idea there is you learn through that process. If you don't blame the referees, if you don't blame the ball, if you don't blame the court conditions, if you don't blame other people when something doesn't happen that you're anticipating should happen, who do you turn to? You turn to yourself. And Michael said to me one time, he said, a loss is not a failure until you make an excuse. And for me, that was always really impactful because I started realizing how often in my life I made excuses when things didn't happen as I expect. And when I learned to take that off the table and ask other people around me to hold me accountable to that, right? What I found was I was pushing myself to get better more often because I wasn't blaming other people.
Wow. Well, with the few minutes we have left, I want to wrap up. I try to wrap up every interview with a lightning round. So just a bunch of fun questions that I always ask leaders. And the first one is, what is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
So it would be John Wooden. And it would be that this concept that you're never going to outperform your inner circle, that you'll never be better than the people you put around you. And that's, you have to own that, right? I mean, the people you have around you are your choice. And that's, again, that's a place. A lot of people think it just, if they let people happen around them. I'm very intentional about how I surround myself with people. And Coach Wooden shared with me that I'll never be better than the people I put around me. So I want really incredible people around me so that I have the opportunity to be pretty incredible in my own right.
Wow. If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
So this one is fun. Consistency over time equals credibility. And, I think in my line of work and in everything I've tried to do and be, credibility is hyper important, right? People have to be able to believe that I'm going to give them something of value. And so consistency over time equals credibility.
Other than your own books, have you had one or two books that have really made an impact on your life that you either give away most often or recommend?
So, there's a writer named Jim Lair, Dr. Jim Lair, who wrote a book called The Power of Story. And again, we've identified that I love storytelling. And his book is as much about the power of story, but also the power of your personal story and how often the story we tell ourselves is a great weakness for many people. We're busy telling ourselves what we can't do. We're identifying the things where we are, we're way too focused on the things that are that we can't do, and it's about how do you change the way you tell your story to yourself.
People see you now, they're listening to this. You've sold 7 million books. You've spent time with the world's greatest leaders. What do you wish people knew about your story that they may not know?
Probably that it's 30 years in the making, right? That it's not, that none of it. I always loved, when you get the chance to interview people and somebody says, oh, they're an overnight success. And you go to study almost any one of these overnight successes, and they're often, a decade in the making. And you just have to, and it changes the way you think about your journey to understand that it doesn't happen. There is no such thing as an overnight success.
You've gotten to spend time with great people, as we've already established. You also have gotten to travel the world. I'm sure you've gotten to experience some of the greatest events on the planet. What's something that you've done in your lifetime that you think everyone should experience before they die?
Wow. So I'll give you a fun one. For me, the Kentucky Derby. Everyone should go to the Kentucky Derby. It is the greatest people watching event on the planet. Like you go, the horses are awesome and they're spectacular and they're beautiful, but the people, you spend time watching the people. First off, you ask yourself, like, do you have a mirror in your house? Because you shouldn't have walked out wearing that hat. But what you also realize is that it's great people watching. The second one I would tell you is I'm a scuba diver. I love to dive. And so I would encourage anyone to dive Tahiti. It's one of the most spectacular places in the world to go dive.
All right. I will add both of those to the list. And just out of curiosity, and this can be both who you want to interview or something you want to do, but I don't know if you have an actual bucket list, but is there anyone left on your bucket list to interview or something in your life you want to do?
So I think, he's been on my bucket list for years and it'll never happen, but I've always wanted real time with Roger Federer. because I love his attention to detail. I love his work ethic. But what I love most of all is that you can, while watching him, if there's no score on the bottom of the screen, or if you're not looking at, you cannot tell if he's winning or losing at any time. And I would love to model that. If I could one day be that person you would have no idea, was this the greatest day or the worst day? I would love to be able to carry myself like that. He fascinates me.
Well, hey, if anyone's listening to this and you have connections with Roger Federer and can hook Don up, let me know.
Up. That's it.
We'll connect you. So our time is running short, so I'll just leave this open-ended. Is there anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
I think the one thing that really stood out was that the idea that go find someone to grow, who can help you grow, and don't be afraid to ask. I love it's the way we started. I think it's the way we end. It was a game-changing relationship for me. Would not have happened if not for the ask. And I would encourage others to find the person that they too should ask.
Well, thank you, Don. And again, we'll include links to all of your websites, your books, your resources in the show notes. Is there anything specifically that you'd want to point people to connect with you with if they want you to speak or anything like that?
I'm on all over social, but LinkedIn is the place that I think we found so many really great relationships. And so and I respond to everything. So I'd love to stay connected. Doug, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your community today.
Yeah, honored, and thank you for investing in me and everyone that will listen to this. We really appreciate it.